Hey guys, so for this score challenge, I'm not going to do a challenge event. I'm instead going to make a guide video showing you guys how to get the maximum possible score with the account that you have. So I'm going to go over my process and then kind of explain what I'm doing and like why I'm making the decisions that I am making. So the first thing you want to do is look at the boss's weakness, right? Because this boss is weak to blue, we're clearly going to be using blue Gojo as our main DPS. When it comes to our supports, if you have SSR Toge, he puts a bigger debuff than blue Geto and he does way more damage, so he's obviously better here. If you don't have him, then you'll have to make do with other units. For me, I'm going to use blue Geto. If you don't have blue Geto, Gakuganji will be your next best bet because he adds a pretty solid curse damage taken debuff as well. His debuff is actually better than Geto's, but Geto ends up contributing more to score because he can combo ult to do a lot more damage. Okay, so after we have that, one of our slots will definitely be occupied by Domain Megumi because Domain Megumi is just OP. He's going to be a main portion of any score challenge team, at least until DE Gojo comes out. When DE Gojo comes out, you'll use either him or Domain Megumi depending on like which score challenge you're doing and who your main DPS is. For this final slot here, a lot of people will be using SR Yaga, but if you have SSR Yaga, he actually adds more damage to a score challenge team than SR Yaga does, even if the challenge is not weak to yellow. So even if half of his kit doesn't function, he still adds more damage than SR Yaga in these situations. And I will break down the math for you guys and show you why that is, and also show you gameplay proving that. So the first thing I want to go over is setting up your team, right? So here I have a few teams that I created here. I'm not going to choose the Recollections yet. I know that Gojo and Geto will have non-standard and Pride, so I'm going to put that as a baseline. So let's look at our damage dealt buffs for this first team right here, with Domain Megumi, SSR Yaga, Geto, and Blue Gojo. So for this team, Geto and Blue Gojo are combo ulting, and then we're getting SSR Yaga and Megumi's ults off before the fight starts. So first, we'll look at the damage dealt buff. For damage dealt buff, we have Gojo's self buff, which is, in my case, 119.4 times 2 because it's at level 9, so 238.8. And then, because I'm going to be getting SSR Yaga's ult off before the debuff window begins, I get another 28.8% damage dealt increase. Damage taken increase, we have Domain Megumi's domain and then his 3 skill 1s, which adds up to 343. P-Tech and C-Tech buff, we have SSR Yaga's passive here, which is 46%, so we're going to add that in here. And then we also have the 120 from Pride, put that in there as well. And then P-Tech and C-Tech damage taken increase. Even off color, SSR Yaga adds 30.2 for 3 turns, which is 90.6, and then 2 stacks of Geto's S2 is 62.6 because it's 2 stacks of this. So we're going to do equals 62.6 plus 90.6. Okay, now this is the reason SSR Yaga adds more damage than SR Yaga in score challenges a lot of the time. There are these buffs that buff your C-Tech given all of these conditions. So when using skills, when using ultimate skills, when using co-op skills, when using blue skills. This adds up to 60, 100, 160, 210. So you're getting a 210 curse technique buff here when all those conditions are met. This is the exact same buff that Yaga gives. So in terms of SR Yaga. So you'll see that when I run the math with SR Yaga's skill 2, it ends up being a much lower multiplier. And I'll show you guys that right now. Damage dealt buff for SR Yaga, we're just using his skill 2, so there's nothing else besides Gojo's self buff. So 238.4 or 0.8. And then damage taken increase, 343. And then here, P-Tech and C-Tech buff, we're getting the 210 from the score challenge buffs, plus 120 from Pride, and then 183.2 from SSR Yaga's skill 2 being stacked 4 times. And then with Ghetto, we get the 62.6. If you look at the multiplier here, this is significantly lower than this. It's actually not even close. And the reason is that we're adding, with SSR Yaga, we're adding numbers to this already big number here and making this into 513. But with SSR Yaga, we have this tiny portion of the multiplier that we're adding 90.6 to. And that ends up being way more meaningful than adding. So adding 90.6 to this section ends up being way more meaningful than adding 183 to this section, because this number is already big enough. And like I've said before, a mix of different buffs and debuffs is the best way to maximize your damage, right? So this is pretty clearly proving that fact. There's a very big difference in the multipliers, right? But when you use SSR Yaga's ult and use his combo ult in this way, with Ghetto getting another stack of his debuff off, you actually do get very similar results, even though it is still lower than this number right here. I'll show you guys that right now. So if we have this scenario where we're changing our rotation to do 3 stacks of SSR Yaga's skill 2, and then combo ulting with him and Blue Gojo, we're going to be using Perfect Sync on SSR Yaga. So we'll put that in here. So damage dealt buff, we're going to get, so we have 238.8 from Blue Gojo's self buffs, and then Perfect Sync gives us another 35. We're going to have that. And then 343 from Domain Megumi, plus SSR Yaga's buffs, which I'll show you, or SSR Yaga's debuff, minus level 8, so it gives a 44.4% damage taken increase. So 44.4. And then P-Tech and C-Tech buff, it's going to be 45.8 times 4, which is 45.8 times 3. Sorry, not 4, because we're going to use 3 stacks and we're going to ult, right? So 137.4. So equals 137.4 plus the 120 from Pride plus the 210 from the score challenge buffs. And then here we have 3 stacks of Ghetto's buffs, which is 93.6. Make sure I got that right. And then, yep, yeah, this should be correct. Okay, so as you can see, even with this setup, our number is a bit lower than the SSR Yaga variant, right? And then now we think about adding Recollections in. So if we look at these 3 numbers, there are no Recollections that add meaningful P-Tech and C-Tech debuffs, or at least reliably do this on the turns that you want to do it on. So we can't really use this one in terms of the Recollections. So we want to affect one of these 2. For this first comp, we're obviously going to want to affect this one instead of this, because adding to a smaller number is more meaningful than adding to a bigger one. So when we look at our options here for Domain Megumi, let's see. So damage increase, so something like this. Let's check all of these. Yeah. So given that I don't have the combo archery rec, my options are Death by Wasp or Skies Connected when it comes to the highest number buffs that I can use or I can apply. Death by Wasp is a 15% damage dealt increase for 2 turns. Skies Connected is a 15% curse tech and physical tech increase for 2 turns. If we look at this multiplier, this is a much bigger number, right? So adding 15 to this is way more meaningful than adding 15 to this. And I'll show you guys that right now. So if I add 15 here, my multiplier becomes 8745. Instead, if I add 15 here, 8834. So this is more damage. So in this situation, we're going to be using Skies Connected on Domain Megumi. And then in order to get SSR Yaga's ult off with my rotation, I have to have an excellent shape on him. So I can't run a damage boosting recollection. So this is going to be IES. So the final comp here, my multiplier is 8834. Looking at this one here, again, we probably want to use Skies Connected on Domain Megumi. And in this situation, we could also run Death by Wasp because we're just using SR Yaga's skill 2, right? So we're not going to need a specific recollection on him. So we can use Death by Wasp and Skies Connected here. And then we're going to add 15 here, and then add 15 here. Let's see, 2, 3, 15, yep. Okay, as you can see, the number went up, but it's still not even close to the damage SSR Yaga's comp puts out. Now we look at this one with Domain Megumi, Geto, SR Yaga's ult, and Blue Gojo. We have P-Sync, but for Domain Megumi, again, the question is Death by Wasp or Skies Connected. If I use Death by Wasp, plus 15, 8526. If I use Skies Connected, 8582. So it's a higher multiplier, so we're going to use Skies Connected. So these are our final multipliers, right? And as you can see, this number is much lower than this number. I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything, so I'm going to look over it one more time. 238.8 plus 28.2, yep. And then 46 plus 120 from Pride, 210 plus 15. Yep, 90.6. And then this one, 238.8 plus 35 from P-Sync. Oh, I guess the ordering here is not exactly accurate. Okay. 35 plus 44.4, yep. And then 137. Yeah, okay. This should be correct. 331.3 times. Oh, this should be 9. So now I'm going to prove to you guys that this is true, because this is the final multiplier for Blue Gojo's ult. On the final turn of the burst phase, this is the multiplier that's being applied with the 2 different compositions. So I'm going to show you guys that right now. An important point also is that if you're using Blue Gojo or HP Gojo in a score challenge, you want turns so you can stack up Domain Megumi's ult, right? So you don't want to waste their 7 turn count during those turns. So you usually want to bring something like our Panda, our Yellow Panda, our Red Panda, or our Saki here, and then just give them some kind of recollection that is going to be useful for your rotation. For my rotation specifically, I'm going to be using Unity on her, if I can. Oh, I have a filter on. I'm going to be using Unity because I need to get their ults up in time. But this is going to be my SSR Yaga rotation, exactly what you guys see in this comp here. Skies Connected, IES, NS, and Pride. So of course there is damage variance, right? So sometimes this comp will give you a higher number on Blue Gojo's ult than this comp, even though the multiplier is lower, just because of damage variance. But if you do many runs overall, this run is going to give you the higher score in the end than this run will. And hopefully I can show that to you guys within just a few tries. So we're going to do this. We're going to taunt on our turn 1 and activate Unity. So we actually have to reset here because I need her to get hit by... The boss needs to do a very specific attack on turn 1 to make sure that she's low enough to die on turn 2. So what your exact rotation is depends on the actual boss, so you're going to have to adjust every time a new map event comes out. But this is the one I figured out for this one. Hopefully he does the big damaging ability. Okay, he didn't do it again, so I have to reset one more time. Okay. Nice. That's what we're looking for. Okay, now we're gonna combo ult on. So an important point, I'm sure many of you are aware, but you want to make sure that you kill the boss's first phase with Domain Megumi's ult, or on the turn that Domain Megumi ults, so that he can have his full 3 buff or 3 debuff window to use his 3 skill 1s. So here we're gonna hope that the boss survives Domain Megumi's ult so that Yaga can get his ult off and give us that 28.8% damage dealt increase for 4 turns. Okay, we're just gonna buff again. It doesn't really matter what we do on these two on the right because the Domain Megumi and Yaga co-op ult will kill the boss. Okay, we're gonna do our rotation. Debuff, debuff, debuff. Now we're gonna pop Skies Connected because it's a 2-turn buff. Now we're going to debuff again and then combo ult on these two to get that massive C-Tech buff on combo ult. It is more damage than using another stack of Geto's skill 2. So let's take note of how much damage our Gojo's ult hits for. So with no crit, it hit for 29.88 million. With team 1. Okay, so we're gonna leave this now. Now I'm gonna show you guys team 2. Hopefully also with no crit. So that was SR Yaga with Geto and Blue Gojo. So let me show you guys that. I'm gonna be using Death by a Wasp on him. So here you'll see that because the multiplier is much lower, the damage is going to be significantly lower on Blue Gojo's ult than 29.8 million. Reset because we need her to die. Oops. Now we hope he does the big damaging move on our Saki here. Nice. Now we start buffing. We'll make sure we finish it off with Blue Gojo's punch if the rest of our team can't. Okay, they were fine. Now we pop both of these abilities. Okay, now we combo ult on these two. And you'll see that the Blue Gojo ult does significantly less damage. $25.6 million, right? Now I'm going to show you guys the third team, this one. So you'll see a number that's very similar to 29.9 mil. It might be a bit lower, might be a bit higher depending on the multiplier RNG, because there is definitely some RNG variance when it comes to how much damage your skills do. But over enough runs, it'll consistently be lower than the average you get from this team. So for this one, we're going to be doing this. And then, technically there's no reason to run NS on Geto here. So we're gonna run Skies Connected on Geto. Or we're gonna run a, let's run this Recollection instead. The free-to-play Kamo Rec. Yeah. Which gives, yeah, it gives 15%, or let's put that on Domain Megumi instead. So we'll have the Kamo free-to-play rec, which gives another 13 here. $35, $44, $15, $13. Yeah, okay. So the multiplier is, yeah, I forgot to account for the fact that we could probably put a different Recollection on Geto and Domain Megumi, because they're both just boosting damage in this case. So you actually end up with a much closer multiplier than before. But what you have to take into account is that even though this multiplier is very similar to this one, this is just the damage that Blue Gojo's ult is doing, right? In this situation, we're combo ulting with Blue Gojo and SSR Yaga. In this team, we're combo ulting with Blue Gojo and Geto. So what ends up happening is that Geto adds a lot more damage to the score than SSR Yaga will with his ult. So this team ends up having a much higher score than this team, even though the multiplier for the damage on Blue Gojo's ult is very similar. So I'll show you guys that right now. The score I got with the first team with SSR Yaga, my max score was 57 million. And then now I'll show you guys what is this team. So this is this team, right? The bottom one here. You'll see that my Blue Gojo ult does very similar damage to the 29.8 million that we got from this team, but in terms of the score, it'll be much lower. So we're gonna hope that Saki gets killed here, or gets hit by the big damaging move. Nice. Start buffing. We're gonna punch just to finish off the boss if Domain Megumi's ult doesn't kill it. Pop this. So again, with the SSR Yaga team, it was a 29.8 million damage Blue Gojo ult with no crit. $29.9, right? So very similar damage. We got 29.8 million or 29.88 million with this SSR Yaga team on Blue Gojo, and then we got 29.9 million with this SR Yaga team. Of course, this is due to damage variance, right? Sometimes this team will outscore it or out damage this team when it comes to the Blue Gojo ult. But the thing is, it doesn't really matter, right? Because in this scenario, Geto's ult added a lot more to the score than SR Yaga's ult did. So even if I finish this fight off, you guys will be able to see that the score with this team is much lower, even if the Blue Gojo ult did pretty much the same damage. I should have just ulted, but it shouldn't matter. It's ult now. As you can see, 45.7 million score. With the SSR Yaga team, my score was 57 million, right? That gap in score is due to the fact that we're combo ulting with Geto instead of combo ulting with Yaga. So in this scenario, even though these multipliers are very similar when it comes to the damage Blue Gojo's ult can do, this team ends up doing way more damage just because of how it's set up. So what team will give your account the highest score? It really depends on what you have. It depends on your recollections, depends on your skill levels, depends on your units. So I'm just showing you guys the baseline in terms of how to actually calculate it and then set it up, right? If you guys want to make this Excel sheet for yourself as well, you can. It's very simple, right? You just have your damage dealt column, your damage taken increase column, you add those two together, and you have your P-Tech and C-Tech buff column, and your P-Tech and C-Tech damage taken increase column. And then your final multiplier column is just 1 plus this number divided by 100 times 1 plus this number divided by 100, because these are percentages, so we have to divide by 100 to get the multiplier value. And then 1 plus this number divided by 100, and then multiply all three of these together to get your final multiplier, which is the percentage, right? Oh, sorry. So yeah, I hope this is helpful, and good luck scoring, have fun scoring, and I hope you guys can figure out ways to get the highest score possible. And if you guys find yourself at the top of any of the leaderboards and any of the future score challenges, definitely leave me a comment. Show me what you got, post a picture, tag me on Discord, whatever it is. I'd love to see that people are looking into it, looking into the damage formula, and getting high scores as a result. Okay, I hope this was helpful. Bye, guys.